let's talk about the recent ceasefire deal reached between Israel and Hamas. We'll talk specifically about the prisoner exchanges and prospects for the ceasefire to hold. I'm joined now by Jeenah, who is a senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute. Naeem, good morning to you and welcome. So at least 23 Palestinian child prisoners released by Israel as part of the ceasefire deal, but 290 Palestinian prisoners released in 2 batches since the Hamas-Israel ceasefire came into effect, ending 15 months of the bombardment of those affected territories. Just share with us your perspective on the prisoner exchanges before we get into the conversation around whether the ceasefire would hold and whether Palestinians have been allowed to return to certain areas. Good morning, by the way, and welcome.
Thank you. So, as you said, there's been 2 rounds of exchange of captives. Remember that in the past few months, Israel has arrested thousands of, or taken captive, kidnapped thousands of Palestinians, including health workers, etc. So the people that are sitting in Israeli jails, the Palestinians are not just activists, not politicians, etc., but journalists, health workers, and dozens of health workers from Gaza. The 2 batches of exchange, last week Sunday and then Saturday just passed, were based on a formula that for each Israeli citizen or each Israeli civilian that was released, a captive that was released, there would be 30 Palestinians who would be released, and for each Israeli soldier, 50 Palestinians. So what we saw on Saturday was 4 female Israeli soldiers who were released, and in return, 200 were released by the Israelis. The ceasefire does remain, as you noted, precarious at the moment.
From your perspective, I mean, how do you perceive the proportion of Israelis, whether soldiers or hostages or others, released in exchange for Palestinians?
Well, I know there's a discourse that suggests that, this means that Palestinians are valued less than Israelis. I don't agree with that. I think that this is a tactical maneuver. The Palestinians who are living under occupation in Gaza, living under siege, don't have the same kind of opportunity that Israelis do to just round up Palestinians wherever they want. And we saw that happening in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, even right now. I mean, in terms of these 2 exchanges, last week Sunday and this Saturday, the number of Palestinians that Israel released, it has in this 1-week period captured more than that in the West Bank already. The Palestinians don't have that, talking just very coldly about it, don't have the same kind of opportunities. And so for Palestinians, it's a huge event to capture 1 Israeli soldier. And so they want to make maximum use of that opportunity. We remember a few years ago, the Gilad Shalit release. He was an Israeli soldier. He was released for something like 1,100 Palestinians. I think that it's a tactical maneuver from the Palestinian side, and I think it's they want to get maximum value for their efforts.
In a future conversation, we want to focus on the plight and the experience of children who are incarcerated. There are a series of laws enacted in 2016 and 2024 by the Knesset, which determine the age of incarceration, the conditions under which those incarcerations happen, the charges and how the children are held. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But one thing that has come up, Naeem, is the treatment and condition of Palestinians that are held. And I'm not sure if you have a perspective on that and you want to share, just in terms of what we hear as well from released prisoners, the conditions under which they are held and whether these conform to international standards, particularly the UN resolutions and treaties relating to the treatment of prisoners in Israeli prisons.
Oh, I mean, the treatment of Palestinian prisoners is something that goes back, of course, for the past almost 80 years. And has been pretty bad. For one thing, in violation of international law, people who are arrested in occupied territory need to be detained in the occupied territory. Palestinian prisoners in general, not all of them, but in general, are detained within Israel. Not if they're arrested in the West Bank, they're not detained in the West Bank. So that, from the very beginning, it's a violation of international law. Then you have this what Israelis call administrative detention, basically detention without trial, as we had in South Africa. And in the Israeli case, there are people who have been under administrative detention, not charged, not tried, for years. Then there's the series of cases of torture that have taken place in Israeli jails, and this has become particularly worse in the past 15 months, especially large numbers of people who were captured in Gaza. Many of them, as I said earlier on, health professionals, I mean doctors who have been treated so badly that their limbs had to be amputated, for example. They've been starved of food, tortured in various other kinds of ways, etc. All of this, of course, in violation of various international law provisions about torture, about how detainees should be held, about how an occupied people should be treated, etc. So Israel certainly has a lot to answer for in terms of how detainees are treated. And the prisoners who have been released Saturday and last week Sunday, the stories coming out from them are quite horrific. In fact, some of them are saying they don't want to talk about everything they endured because families of those who are still in prison will become too upset.
Naeem, will the ceasefire hold? Hamas says Israel is blocking Palestinians from returning to northern Gaza in violation of the agreement.
So this morning that changed. I mean, Qatar announced that there was mediation, and there's been an agreement that this week there'll be two sets of releases of captives from Gaza, not only Saturday as has been the plan, but also on Thursday. And there was one particular woman who Israel was making a big noise about, and because of whom yesterday they prevented Palestinians from going to the north in Gaza, and in fact opened fire on them. This morning, when the assurance was given that she will be released on Thursday, not wait until Saturday, Israeli troops started withdrawing somewhat from the Netzarim corridor that has divided Gaza north and south. And from this morning, Palestinians have been moving in, but into the north, back to where their homes used to be. The homes don't exist anymore, of course. But the ceasefire deal remains very fragile. And whether next week, on the 16th day, as it's supposed to be, whether negotiations will actually begin on phase 2 and how those negotiations will go is all up in the air. In Israel, there's a very strong right-wing push that Israel's onslaught on Gaza and genocide must resume. Just today, one of the ministers, the National Security Minister, Ben Gvir, expressed great anger that Palestinians were being allowed to return to the north of Gaza, and called on his government to restart the genocide and prevent Palestinians from moving. So the ceasefire remains very fragile. I mean, everyone hopes that it will hold, it'll continue into phase 2 and then phase 3, and will actually be a proper ceasefire. But it goes from day to day, and we judge it from day to day.
President Donald Trump has asked Egypt and Jordan to take Palestinians from Gaza. He is quoted as saying to clean out the whole thing. It could be temporary or it could be long-term. We've seen responses from both those governments saying no, they've rejected that proposal, as have Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Your thoughts on that?
You know, the fact that we even have a discussion about a call by the most powerful leader in the world, a call for ethnic cleansing. We talk about it as if it's kind of a normal political move. He is calling for ethnic cleansing. He's calling for a war crime to take place. Of course, it's not going to fly. Neither Egypt nor Jordan is going to accept such a proposal. If they do, Trump will last for 4 years in his position. Those governments are afraid of their long-term survival. And of course, Palestinians are not going to move from Gaza. I mean, these people we are seeing moving now to the north of Gaza, they're moving to where they know their homes had been, but has been completely destroyed. 90% of the buildings in northern Gaza are completely destroyed. They're going home because they don't want to go anywhere else. They want to stay in Gaza. There's no way they can be moved out of there unless there is a resumption of a full-on genocide. So he's dreaming, and of course, he made the statement before that the land on the coast of Gaza is beautiful for development and all of that. That's not going to happen. And again, this is the president of the United States calling for ethnic cleansing, calling for a war crime. And there needs to be some way in which he and his government are held accountable for this.
As you say, Naeem, there's almost a sanitization or a numbness around how, such bold statements are encapsulated and debated or discussed. The reality is 2 years on, more than 2 years on, with various moves, either in the ICJ, the UN Security Council, the General Assembly and elsewhere, for a great deal more urgency and political will to finally resolve for the future and the well-being of particularly Palestinians in the region for a long time has, landed where it has, with the various bids being vetoed in the Security Council. How do you think this is likely to play out, as somebody who has watched this not only in a contemporary setting, but historically as well?
Well, what we saw over the past 15 months is one battle in a long, to use a military analogy, in a long war. And that war will end only when Israel's occupation ends. Israel is guilty by, according to the ICJ, of an illegal occupation. It's also guilty of, according to many legal experts, of apartheid, of colonialism. The ICJ ruling given early last year, was that all of the settlements must be dismantled. Israel needs to move out of the occupied territories. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza are illegal, and Israel has to move out. So all of this illegality taking place. The war, as I say, will end when that ends. How that will end, it requires multifaceted approach, because the big issue here is, as you said, UN Security Council, General Assembly, ICJ, ICC. Even in the Security Council, we had one resolution in June last year that was even supported by the United States. And yet Israel just thumbed its nose at it. But the real issue here is that the United States continues to uncritically support Israel, and in the past 15 months has supported, enabled, funded, and provided the weapons for a genocide that has been taking place. And until that kind of assistance from the US stops, I think that we will continue seeing this kind of impunity with which Israel acts. Will that support from the US stop?
Yeah.
I don't think it will happen in the next 4 years, but I think that we are getting there.
The Mapungubwe Institute's Naeem Jeenah, thank you very much for your time this morning, reflecting on the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas.